Hey everyone, welcome back to another video. And this is the second to last round of the Melbourne Chess Cup Classic Swiss, played I think back in October or something like that. And I'm paired up against Jim Papadinis, whose rating is a bit higher than me, and he's a senior player. And doing preparation for this game, I realized that he didn't play any mainline openings. He played 1d4 and mainly went for this relatively passive setup. But I figured that after doing a bit of research against a stone wall and these kind of side openings, I should be fine. And what I really want to show is that kind of what I messed up, and I hope that you can learn like what to do in these kinds of positions, these kinds of close center positions, mainly in like a semi-Slav structure. So my opponent opens up with d4, and I respond to d5. And after knight f3, knight f6, my opponent could still go for c4, and then I would play c6 for my normal Slav repertoire. But he plays e3, which I kind of expect, and I play c6. So the benefit of this move is that if they play c4 right now, I can go for e6 and going into more of semi-Slav territory. And there's also this move bishop f5, I think, which is completely fine in these nowadays, I think. But e6, after c6, my opponent does not play c4. They play bishop d3. And now the benefit of playing c6 here is that I can bring the bishop out because I haven't closed the diagonal with e6, and because white hasn't played c4, they cannot play the immediate queen b3, which should normally be a problem if the bishop has left its post on c8. So now my opponent plays c4, and now I'm in time to defend the center with e6. And then my opponent plays knight bd2, non-committal move, perhaps this clearly shows that the bishop wants to be on b2 after b3, bishop b2. And after knight bd7, castles, bishop e7. So now in this position, I'm faced with the decision, should I play bishop d6 or should I play bishop e7? Now, I think I made the correct decision of going for bishop e7, because if I go for bishop d6, we can go for a sample line, for example, h3. And now if I give up the bishop here, which is considered best, then I don't think that I have any winning chances at all. And white is the one that has the bishop here and has potential to open up the position. But if I go for bishop h5, white can play queen b3. And then if I play queen c7, they can hit me with the move c5. And now we can see the drawback of having the bishop on d6. Bishop comes back to e7, and the queen retreats to c2, so we can see that the queen on c7 and queen on c2 is kind of like eyeing each other, but the queen on c2 is more useful on this diagonal. Meanwhile, this queen is not really useful here. It could perhaps push e5 eventually, but we can see that the downside is that this bishop is forced back to e7, which is quite passive. And after, let's say, b6, white is in time to play b4. And I think white has a nice advantage in this kind of position, because the bishop on d6 was kicked back with c5, being hit with the tempo. And so I decided to play bishop e7 correctly. And after queen b3, I play queen c7. Now, obviously not queen b6, because again, c5 would not be very pleasant for me. Is something like this. Or even I think knight takes b3 with knight a5 coming is also quite annoying. So yeah. So I play queen c7 correctly, and after h3, I play bishop h5. And now my opponent plays queen c2, seeing that they have to play b3 and bishop b2 to develop the dark squared bishop. And so here, I already make a big inaccuracy. I thought it was harmless, but castling is already a big mistake, actually, because it allows white to play the move b3 to solidify the center. Now, really, what I should have gone for instead of castling is to take on c4, which is quite thematic in the semi-Slav, and I should have realized this sooner. The point is that after queen takes c4, I castle, and let's say if they play e4, I can play bishop g6, put pressure on the center. Perhaps I can play e5 or go for c5, and I'm okay there. And if they go for b3, bishop b2, then I can play the move rook fc8, followed by c5 next, possibly. And if they play, I think additionally, I can also go for this knight d5 plan, which is recommended by the computer. The point is that if they push e4, they would be giving up the f4 square, And if they play bishop b2, I can even take drastic measures here to play the move f5. So yeah, I really should have taken this into consideration. Strategically, it's quite risky to play f5 because you're weakening the e6 pawn so much, but it's a very double-edged move and it's computer approved. So I don't know, I could continue with bishop d6 next and then bring the other knight to f6, something like that, or even go for the attack here with like king h8, g5, g4, and bring the rook to g8, let's say. So that's quite interesting and something to definitely keep in mind, that if white is preparing to play b3 in these kind of semi-Slav, positions, closed, this triangle structure, for example, then it's very much, we have to like consider the captures on c4. But instead I decided to castle, and the problem is that after b3, now if I take on c4, they can take back with the pawn and get a massive center. And this was not possible before they have played b3. So after castles, I think white already has a very nice edge. And after b3, I play a very dubious move, bishop g6. Now what white should really do is just take on g6 and claim that this structure is really bad. And if they get to an endgame, they're going to be a lot better. And for example, just playing bishop b2 calmly controls the e5 square, and white can even think about in the future of playing e4 to open up the bishop's diagonal. e4, and then, pushing d5 eventually. But instead, they played bishop b2, and now I should have taken on d3. Like, I don't know why I didn't do something like this. Play a5, and after a4, bring the rook to d8. Oops, sorry about that. Rook to d8, and position is still balanced, I would say. Once I've exchanged that strong light-squared bishop from the white side. But instead, I play rook ac8, which, the rook isn't really useful here because it would much prefer to be on d8. But secondly, the most important point is that they can now take on g6, making use of my slow move. Okay, the point, what I was thinking during the game is that I want my queen defended, and I want to prepare the move c5. And so I thought it made quite a bit of sense, but in hindsight, I really should have just taken on d3. Yeah, and I regretted this decision right after I made it. I was like, why didn't I just take on d3 and maybe even then play rook ac8? It's quite possible. But instead I went for this. They took on g6, hg6, and the rook ac1. And now I make another questionable decision, queen b8. Now the idea is clear, to play c5, where the queen is not vulnerable on c7. However, this is way too slow. And I want to play c5, but this entire operation with rook ac8 and the queen b8 allows white to just grab the initiative with e4, which they correctly played. And then I took on e4 with the knight, because if I take on e4 with the pawn, I was afraid that I'm giving white some additional options with knight g5, and then taking back with the other way. And so I played knight takes e4, knight e4, d4, and then after queen e4, I played the move bishop f6, which intends to prevent or prevent white from pushing the pawn to d5, and also controlling some central squares. But I don't think this is best. So my opponent played an inaccuracy here actually with knight e5, but I think position is still okay for white. They still have a nice edge. But the computer recommends something like g4 to prepare g5, where my bishop will just be horrible on e7. Let's say after rook fd8, g5, bishop e7, and then a4, getting even more space. Black is really stuck for counterplay, because if they play c5, then d5 will come. And this is a very tough position already. But instead, knight e5 was chosen, and then I play rook fd8. And then they blundered here actually with rook fe1. And I didn't see this during the game, but I can't believe I missed this, that it's simple. I just take on e5 with the bishop, and they have to take back with the pawn, and the knight c5 to d3 just wins in exchange. Yeah, so I can't believe I didn't see this actually during the game. And I thought there was some like knight takes f7 threats, and so I just played knight f8 defensively, very, very passive. And after rook cd1, I'm not sure it's strictly necessary, but it's quite a useful move. White can just support the knight with f4 instead. But yeah, rook cd1 was chosen. I play queen c7. The idea is to prepare c5 perhaps, but also another idea is to activate the queen via a5, which after bishop a3, they actually allow queen a5. So I think they just completely missed this move. Instead, f4 was best. And the problem for black is, again, it's very difficult to find an active plan, because if I play c5, then again, d5 is the typical problem. And instead they play bishop a3, which allows queen a5. And I thought, okay, they have to take on f8 now. But actually, taking on f8 is already a big concession here. It was played in the game, but the computer recommends bishop e2, and after queen takes a2, just retreating with the queen to c2, threatening rook a1 to trap the queen, and white will soon win this pawn on a6. Let's say after queen a6, rook a1, queen b6, c5, yeah, black is just gonna win back the pawn. However, this position is okay for black. After rook a8, fighting for the a file, rook ea1, takes, and then black can take on e5 with the bishop, removing a strong piece, d e5, and then play queen b8 to kick the rook back, let's say rook a4, and then rook d5. And the computer assesses this as equal, but I can clearly see that this is a much improved version, with the bishop not being that good on this diagonal, and possibly there are some things to target. So there is some play in this position for black. But instead they played bishop takes f8, which I thought was kind of forced, and I was happy to see. I play king takes f8, and then they play a4. Now I see that there's a weakness created on b3, so I decide to play queen b4. Alternatively, I thought that bishop takes e5 wasn't very good. Okay, so they can take on e5 with the pawn, and I think that this is still quite good for white. I can take on d1 and then play rook d8, but and they can't even retreat with the queen to c2 because wait, maybe they can actually, because I can't take on d1 and then take on e5 because there's going to be queen d8 checkmate. But even something like king e7 looks to be okay for black, and maybe maybe this pawn is actually overextended. I could see that being an argument. But instead, if queen takes e5 happens, then I can trade the queens, and they're gonna have to take with the pawn, because if they play rook takes e5, then this rook d7, doubling up on the d file would be very strong, because there's lack of support over the d pawn. So let's say after rook e4, rook cd8, I'm just gonna play c5 next. So for example, something like this, and I'm just gonna win a pawn, and I am threatening e5, so if they play f4, I can just play f6 and go for e5 next. So black has a big advantage in this, and this is just, you know, a winning endgame. So bishop takes e5 would have been like a way to get an equal position, which I don't know why, but I just didn't see. Maybe I was kind of afraid for some reason, but really it shouldn't be. It's not excusable that I missed this kind of opportunity to play bishop takes e5, and in the previous variation I missed the opportunity to win a clear exchange. So either way, after a4 I play queen b4, threatening this pawn, but they can just defend with rook e3. And now I make an interesting queen maneuver, queen d6. So it was kind of funny, my queen was on c7, and then it went to b8, and then it went to c7 again, and then a5, and the queen b4, queen d6. That's how many moves, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Just kind of funny, but not really good. Like, I'm just trying to see and hope that white makes a mistake or something, but clearly not good. Rook e d3, and then I play queen c7, so that's 7 moves with the queen, and they play the move f4 here, which I should be responding with like something like king g8 and just sit on the position. The king is better placed on g8 than on f8, but instead I play this move rook d6. The idea, you know, is very clear. I just want to double up on the d file, but at some point c5 may be quite annoying. Not right now, because I think if c5, then I can just play rook d5, and they can't really take advantage of this square because I can always play bishop e7. So you know, c5 at the right moment is quite troublesome. But instead they play this move king h1, and already in this position I thought king h1 is a sign of weakness. Like, this shows that white doesn't really know what to do. But Yeah, I think the plan with g4, g5 there would have been still really strong. But instead, I get the opportunity to double up, and then they play knight f3. So the idea is to play g4 without allowing the bishop to come to h4. But I don't see a reason why g4 immediately is not okay. Like, it's just you can play g5 next, and if the bishop comes to h4, then the knight comes to f3, and the bishop is quite vulnerable. So not sure the purpose of knight f3, but yeah, I play the next move, queen a5. I thought, okay, the queen is not useful on c7. Let me just activate it again. And here, my opponent plays g4, and we're both currently in like time trouble. So I play this horrible move, b5. Now, I think this is actually the move that gave me winning chances, but objectively it's not good. The point, I misevaluated this position because first off, I think they can just take on b5 and then play c5 here, and or even like the immediate c5. Yeah, I think actually this one takes in the c5, and if I'm forced to go rook d5, I thought that this position was okay because I had so much pressure on d4, and this pawn I thought was not so dangerous. But after g5, my bishop no longer exerts pressure on this d pawn, and so this resulting position I think is just horrible with this passed pawn and this bishop being just shut out of the game. White can even continue with going for the attack, h4, h5, and if I take, even f5, something like that in the future, if my rook moves away. So yeah, b5 was just like a overreaction, but instead they play the move g5, which is a big mistake because it allows me to take on c4. Now the rook is being attacked and they have to take back. And then after I play bishop e7, the pawn structure is just ruined for white. So there's some potential to take the pawns here. Now my opponent plays h4, and it's clear what they're doing. They want to go for h5. And what I should have done is just taken on a4. And then I'm attacking c4, so they're going to play c5, play rook d5, and then they play h5. And I think this is very, very dangerous. If I take here, then queen h7 is just deadly. So yeah, after c5, I can't play that. I have to play rook c to d7, rook 6 to d7, and then after h5, sample line goes something like this. I take on c5, making use of this pin, and then after hg6, bishop d6. This is kind of a computer line, but yeah, I mean, if I saw this position during my calculations, I definitely wouldn't have gone into this anyways. Queen h7, rook f8, knight h4, king e8, knight g6, and then I'm forced to give up the exchange. Otherwise, like, my rook doesn't have any good squares, so something like this would have been just crushing. And yeah, the complications just favor white by a lot. Exchange the queens, and this endgame is just winning for white after rook a3. So yeah, the pawn is dropping. So yeah, I mean, that would have been a better try because white had to play some accurate moves, but king g8, not good at all. Waste time, and it allows white to play the move knight e5. And now I played queen takes a4, which I thought was the entire purpose, you know, of queen a5 and then taking on c4, or like queen a5, b4, b5, and then taking on c4. But here, my opponent could just play the immediate c5, first off shutting down this rook, so it has to go to d5, or no, I think in this position h5, yeah, h5, and the point is that after I take, g6. I think this is already a dead loss position because if I take on g6, then queen takes g6 activates the queen with the rook coming to g1. This is just decisive, and there's also queen f7 threat. And if I decide to play f6, then after knight f7, I just lose a clear exchange. But maybe it's pretty bad. I maybe have some chances with queen d5 here, but I doubt that it's any like objective, real drawing chances. But instead, they play this move queen f3, which is understandable. They want to play h5 and capture back with the queen. But I can play, okay, not bishop f8. I can play c5 here. Yeah, c5 is the move that I missed, actually. And it really shows that the counterplay is very significant. After h5, I take on d4, hg6, threatening some takes here, so I take back. And the point is that once I allow white to take on g6 and I take back the f-pawn, the queen can't come in. So this is a very important tempo. And if they take on d4, rook d4, rook d4, cd4, and they play queen a8, bishop f8, they cannot take on g6 because queen d1, and then the king is forced to step up, and the queen c2 would win the knight. But instead queen c8 here, and then black would be able to get a draw with queen d1. So in this position, I really should have thought of c5. I was probably afraid of d5 here also, and also the complications that could occur after h5. But yeah, I mean, it's a chance was given to me, so I really should have found it. Instead, I play this horrible bishop f8 move. I thought that it was defensive, but it just allows white to play h5. And now I play the horrible mistake g takes h5. I really should play hc5 here and allow the taking on g6, because at least now the queen doesn't get in, with tempo or something like that. But instead I take on h5, after which they play the move g6. And now there's actually, instead of g6, maybe if you want to pause the video and try to find the best move for white, I'll give you like 3 seconds. But basically the best move in this position is to open up even more lines with f5. And now the threat is just to take on e6 with too much pressure on f7. So if I take on f5, the queen activates, and still f7 is too weak. I'm just losing in this position. But instead g6 was played, and then I play the move f takes g6. And the point is that now, after knight takes g6, I get the c4 pawn. And now this position is already winning for black, actually, because the attack dissipates. Instead, the computer recommends after g6, fg6 to play queen h3, and then I can play c5, and the game is still very messy, clearly. But instead, knight takes g6 was just horrible, after which I can take on c4, and after queen takes h5, my opponent missed this move, queen d5 check, trading the queens. And this endgame is just winning because of the 2 extra pawns, and the possibility of playing c5, and also this weak d4 pawn. So my opponent plays knight e5, I play c5, and for dc5 I play bishop takes c5. And so the rest of the game is not very interesting. You can just see how I convert this. Takes here, and then I play the move bishop d6, covering the b8 square, and also threatening to win another pawn. The knight comes to c6, and then I just play king h7. So I want to take the pawn on f4, but I don't want to allow knight e7 check. So I play king h7, they take on a7, and the rest of the game just continues like this. I got the king out very nicely, play g5, bring the rook back, and then I managed to activate the king. I'm also still cutting off the king. Knight e7, check, g3, check here, and then I activate the king. And then my opponent plays rook d3, after which I play an interesting move, bishop c7. The threat is to play g2, and after the king goes to g1, then bishop e6 would be decisive. And so my opponent needs to think about that. And so they play knight c8, and clearly white's pieces are not helping in the defense. So I just play king g4, and the game soon ended here. After king h7, king h7, and then my opponent resigned because g2 is unstoppable. So actually a horrible game. Realistically, for my part, I didn't manage to I didn't understand the position well enough to realize that in the position before, that here I should have taken on c4 before white decides to play b3. And so I think for Semi-Slav players, you'll find this tip very useful, and I hope that you don't make the same mistake as I did. So thank you so much for watching. Alright, before I end the video, actually I just want to report that this is the last video of this tournament coverage, because after this game, I'm on like 7.5 out of 8, only dropping half a point to Gary Becker in the second round. But I've essentially won this tournament, despite like the last round. But in the next week, I actually overslept and didn't manage to come to the round. And I reported it to the tournament organizer, and my opponent was given a forfeit win. That didn't really affect the tournament situation though, because I already won clear first, and I'm quite happy about that, although quite disappointed in myself that I missed the final game. Anyways, that's it from me. Thank you so much for watching. If you have any additional like video requests, openings, and such, please just comment those down below. So thanks so much for watching. Bye.